Our next session is Our Path Forward, a live look into our Hispanic ERGs. Please welcome Mike Garcia, Managing Vice President, Card Technology Capital One, and Janet Ramcharitar, Vice President, Global Talent, Altus Group.
Hi, and welcome to the session today. I'm Mike Garcia. Beyond being an MVP at Capital One, the role I'm actually most proud of is I'm also the founding executive sponsor for Hispanics in Tech at Capital One. I also lead people leadership. So very much excited to be here today about today's topic. It means a lot for all of us as leaders in each of our respective organizations to really challenge ourselves at what we do with our employee resource groups. And so today, this should be a conversation among all of us, right? And in order to do that, we need to be able to have parallel communication. So we're going to have a chat box, and we want you all to use that chat box to post questions, comments, engage. And we're going to talk with you throughout this, the time that we have together. So let's try that. All right, you guys got your fingers ready for the keyboards? I want you to type in to the chat box what you love about high tech. And while you do that, I'll share with you a little that, Janet and I have been really excited working with high tech. I can say personally, I've been working with high tech since about, 2013, 2014, where I've been at many of the sessions before COVID, and I look forward to going in person again sometime soon in the sessions. But high tech has always been a family. It's been a place where we could come together and have a network and grow a network, because those natural networks just aren't in place in many of our organizations, unfortunately. And that's why these employee resource groups are so important to us. So that's something I love about high tech, among many other reasons. I am so excited to see the comments being made about the familia and the connections. It is absolutely something that resonates with us. And with that, I want to introduce Janet Ramcharitar. And please, Janet, fill in the audience with your incredible experience.
Thanks, Mike. Hello, good afternoon, good evening. I'm so privileged and thrilled to be here talking to you all today. My name is Janet Ramcharitar, and I am the Vice President of Global Talent for Altus Group. And as part of my role, I get to have the great pleasure of leading diversity, equity, and inclusion as a thing. And it is just such a privilege to be invited to speak on this very important topic, an area of focus that tends, in my opinion, to be undervalued, but can be so critical to an organization's success. How? By tapping into the rich and diverse thinking available through our ERGs. I think we are seeing an evolution. We're seeing some of that come to fruition now in more and more organizations, especially those that are more advanced in this space. They're getting it. We're certainly leading the way when it comes to showcasing how ERGs can be a real competitive advantage. But I think if we look back in history, or we go back in time and we think about where did we start? ERGs were really put into place maybe by the people, for the people, and to some extent still are, but they were more a safe place for employees with kind of common backgrounds to commiserate on both their positive and maybe not so positive work experiences, right? And I think what we were trying to accomplish was to find a way where we could almost just say, hey, you know what, go and do your thing. Don't bother, us at the top with this stuff. You all kind of try to figure it out. I think those days are really kind of going away. And now organizations are really seeing, hey, I can leverage ERGs to help solve business problems, business priorities. Mike, what do you think?
Janet, as you were talking, I agree with everything you're saying. But as you were talking, I was going back to the very first resource group I attended was probably at the end of the 90s. And, even then it opened my eyes, because it was more just like a bunch of people who got together, who fit in the Hispanic family. We got in a conference room, I remember how quickly I realized that this is something different, because there were people in the room that thought we should be there to, support kind of our home countries that, many of us kind of originated from, that wasn't in the United States. There was others who were from here, but have a Hispanic background and never learned Spanish. And so they always feel like they're kind of this on the periphery, but they know that they're culturally Hispanic and they don't know what that means. And there was this place of like coming together and feeling like, oh man, well, this is just good for us, like to come together and realize, hey, we're beautiful just as we are, no matter how you came to be here. It's awesome that we're here, and we all feel a little bit of that imposter syndrome. But it quickly became aware that we were the only ones who cared about it back then, like this little group that got together. And then if anybody else wanted to get involved, they just wanted to do the cultural hug. It was like, oh, well, here's a few $100s to go have a party, see you off, right? And that was really kind of frustrating. It was kind of this neat thing that we did. And then when I remember the transformation started happening really in the 2000s, where a lot of the research coming out of universities around diversity, and where qualified individuals who are diverse produce way better results. And that really got people to wake up and say, okay, maybe there's more to this. Let's spend a little more time with the resource groups. But even then, in a lot of the organizations, and I've been in either the organizations or leading diversity organizations for over a decade, and I have to tell you, it went from being like this thing that was neat to something that they really wanted to understand better, but it would be one of these things where they meet with you now and then you leave, and then you come back 6 months later and you have to rebuild that relationship again and get them to understand. And then it got to a place where, people started to understand better. They understood the journey of diversity. The IDI came out, where people started to understand this transition you have to go on. And this integration of differences is the key, not ignoring those differences. And that has been aided in tremendously because organizations like High Tech exists, because we can actually reach out and have resources and communities that can help us get better and exchange ideas. So I've seen in the last 5 years, probably the biggest increase in maturity around ERGs. And for me, it's been breathtaking to go from kind of this cultural hug to really understanding pipelines of hiring, understanding, basically clusters of areas in the country and universities where we have greater numbers of Hispanics, starting to understand how Hispanics or other, URGs fall out of different processes and communities. And so it's really been this incredible journey. And as you said, it has built a momentum and is going into a place that I hope will lead us to a future that, our children and their children, don't have to struggle with being the only or feeling left out, in their organizations.
Yeah. Mike, so many things, to unpack, and a lot resonates with me, not just as a woman who identifies with underrepresented groups, but and how my experience has unfolded, being that. When I think about ERGs, for me, it was a safe place. It was somewhere that I could go and just express myself in a way that I felt comfortable and not feel worried that I was going to be judged for the way I said something, the food I ate, the experience I felt. And even more recently, when we think about all the social injustice that's happening in the world, who could I talk to about that? How that made me feel? At times, I didn't hear anybody at the senior leadership level talking about it. And so I didn't know if it was okay for me to do that. But here in my little ERG, I knew that I could because we were going through it together. And what I'm seeing as well is this evolution of moving away from ERGs being like this social club. How many times have we heard, hey, go and throw a party? I like to call it the triple F, food, fun, and festivities, right? You get to have dollars and barely any, let's be honest, to try to get super creative so that we could somehow check a box. And so from an external standpoint, our investors are feeling like, wow, okay, this organization is doing something related to DEI. And where I felt like we were really maybe missing the boat was just around showing up authentically, right? We know people want to see themselves in the companies in which they work for. And what ERGs have been able to do is just that. It's been able to kind of like showcase Hey, we're more than the triple F. We're more than celebrating, LGBTQ, diversity month, or Asian Heritage Month, or Black History Month, because guess what? I continue to be Hispanic. I continue to be Black. I continue to be Asian after that month is over. So my experience continues to unfold day after day, year after year. And that's where I felt the turning point, where we started to look at ERGs as more than just a social club, but an opportunity for people to have a voice and say, this is what you need to do as a company to help increase my experience, improve my experience as an employee, or create more what we call equality and equity. Because I think, you can't have one without the other. When we think about equality and equity, none of us are starting at the same place, right? Some of us don't have that privilege. We don't have the same education background. We don't have the same sponsorship. So how do I get that? And that's really where I felt the power of ERGs could be so much more leveraged. Mike, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's a lot going through my mind, especially in that last point, those last points you made, because when I think about the experience that I have had, which, is obviously unique to me, but I did not have, multi-generational wealth that I could depend on. Right. I did not have, the stay in one place and get to know everybody childhood that, some people have. There are a lot of things that I didn't have, but I do certainly have, privileges, right? As a Hispanic, I'm a white Hispanic, right? And that comes with, several advantages in the society I've been growing up in. And that has been something that, I've tried to come to terms with and understand in how I can, hold the elevator for others, where, doors have been opened for me and try to help lift people up. I've been very fortunate in my career to have opportunities come, and, I'm in the position I'm in now, which is an executive position. And so I'm always thinking about, all right, how do I help people? One problem with BRGs and ERGs, in our company, we call them BRGs. So if you hear me say that, I mean ERGs. I want you. There's this concern that came up at one point, and it was, hey, do you feel like you're being overutilized, overtapped? And it's funny. I'm sitting with my other peers who run their respective groups, our Blacks group, our women's group, and we also have an allies group. Yeah, we get tapped all the time, right? I mean, it's for interviewing folks, for going and speaking and things, and doing that kind of stuff. But that's not the thing that wears me out, right? The thing that wears me out is having to feel like we're always getting set back on our journey along the way. It's like, right around the Black Lives Matter movement, there was an incredible amount of investment for folks to learn about privilege, learn about, the challenges in our country and the world, and to really kind of invest in themselves and their growth. And it really was great because we suddenly had more people who were willing to lend a hand. But as all things ebb and flow. And I've noticed that not just in my company, but just in general around, the level of folks leaning in and being those allies has kind of slowed, right? And so it raises that question, Janet. I'd be curious, especially kind of the work that you're doing, how do we I have some thoughts, but I want to hear yours first. And how do we maintain that energy around people who are interested in getting involved, being allies, or even, within their own communities, supporting their ERGs, so we aren't overly relying on just the same people over and over again?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I also see that we had a really great inquiry just around, what is it that C-suite level can do to really help transform, ERGs, and how we're looking at ERGs, and I guess just even more broadly, our DEI movement. I couldn't agree with you more just on what I call poster children, especially if you're an only. How many times have you been asked, hey, just because you're Black, can you lead the Black resource group? Or just because you're Hispanic, can you lead the Hispanic resource group? And can you just make sure you're doing things and keeping folks almost like keeping, the peace and keeping quiet just to show that we're doing something. So when I think about C-suite and when I think about connecting that to allyship, let's be honest, numbers still tell us that we have white men leading the way, right? For by and large, we have white men that are at the top of the food chain. And the first thing I always say is I try to understand or help them understand and think about it differently. For example, when we think about equality and we think about we want to get after gender equality and pay equity, what I tend to ask those white men or cisgender males is, what happens to your salary? What happens to your pay if we, pay this woman the same thing? What happens to your pay? Nothing. Or I think about as a man, and when you have daughters, right? How would you, what counsel would you give your daughters and what advice would you give your daughters if they were to come and work in this organization and try to navigate their way through this organization? Would you tell them, just kind of join that ERG and silence them that way? Or would you really try to be thoughtful about how you empower and enable? So it starts with really seeking to understand from an authentic place. And I cannot say that enough. Authenticity is key. Allyship to me means using your voice and lending your voice to people that may not necessarily be in the room with you and that, have the same opportunities to speak to the people that you are able to speak to, or that are seeing you in a very specific way. Allyship is about taking the time to understand the other experience. And it's not about defense or defending. And I think that's what happens. As soon as you start to say, hey, look, this is my experience, people tend to go into defense mode. And that's because as humans, we automatically think we need to fight or flight. And so when we are thinking through the lens of, gosh, this person it almost sounds like they're accusing me of doing something. That is absolutely not the case, right? That is it. What it is all about seeking to understand. Listen to what you're hearing, not from a place of judgment, but truly from saying, wow, I didn't know that. I didn't know that that was happening, or that's what your experience is or has been. Let's talk about what we need to do differently. But here's the key, though. Here's the caveat to that. We like to think about this as on-ramp, off-ramp. Okay, so you get on the ramp. I'm having a conversation with you. Let me give you an example. You and I are in a presentation, delivering a presentation, Mike. You are from the outside looking in, what would look to be like a white male, and I'm the woman. And on top of that, I'm the woman of color in the room. I deliver the presentation, nail all the points. And at the end of that, questions are all directed to you. Questions and the comfort that folks have to ask those questions are all directed to you. And you take every opportunity to answer the questions. And I stand here and smile like I am right now. And then after that meeting, my manager could visibly see that I'm upset. And I am, at this point feeling like, gosh, I felt invisible in that moment. Now, Mike, it's not an accusation on your part to say, well, gosh, why didn't you in that moment say, actually, Janet's probably better equipped to answer that question. Let's ask her what she thinks. You're doing what you were asked to do, which is, respond and support. Now, also, when I'm talking to my manager, they have an opportunity, or a leader in the organization, they have an opportunity to really show up and be authentic and listen just for the sake of listening. Don't listen to try and solve or say, oh, well, gosh, I'm going to call Mike in and I'm going to let him know that that was inappropriate. That's not what I'm asking for. What I'm asking you to do in this moment is just listen to my experience. I don't need you to problem solve or be the hero, or what we might hear oftentimes, the white hero. I don't need that. And so I feel like when we can start with from a place of listening and seeking to understand, that brings in a level of okay, now I'm starting to understand and learn more what can we do together to problem solve? Hey, our ERGs are absolutely there to do more than just that fun food and festivities. They're there to really help us solve these problems, right? They have been living this existence their entire life. So wouldn't it be make the most sense to go to the people that are having those experiences, to tap into that knowledge? What can we do differently? And then from there, hey, let's make some real investment. Okay, too often we talk about what's your diversity and equity and inclusion budget? What's your ERG budget? Pretty much next to nothing. You're asked to make miracles out of straw. And so we got to start to showcase that we really mean what we say and walk the talk. This is not a check the box for the investors externally. This is truly about making change. And we have to say we're going to sign up for this and then put our money where our mouth is. Mike, what do you think?
Janet, I could spend hours talking to you because I love the stories you tell and kind of the way you frame it. There's a couple things that I think are really important here. Harvard did this study about what every great leader had in common, and there were three things that every great leader had in common. Right? You pick a leader, and these three things were present. There is authenticity, empathy, and logic. Now, every person has a weakness in one of these areas. But guess what they also found in that study was underrepresented groups sacrificed one of those more than any other group. And you can guess, authenticity was it. And so how are we going to be the next leaders if we have to sacrifice authenticity? So going back to the question of what can the CEOs and the boards do? Well, it starts with asking yourself, when you say, does that person have executive presence? Are you actually saying, does that person sound like me? Because that is not going to allow people to be their authentic selves. Authentic selves is allowing people to be just as natural as they can be and proud of who they are and able to talk about who they are. It goes beyond, just giving them a BRG. And, I've seen some companies, like you say, really kind of throw pennies at, BRGs. Now I've seen a company where they really spend not only on the resources to have the cool events where you bring in thought-provoking leaders and speakers from around the world that represent your community, but also spend on research and data and trying to understand the problem so you can educate the board. And then the board and the CEO should be getting that information and trying to and start to really appreciate the differences of each of these communities and each of these individuals, and what makes sense for one group isn't going to make sense for these other groups. And so starting to actually make that a section of your readouts to your board is going to be an indicator whether that's a company that really is going to support you or not. The natural thing that follows from that, folks, is are there leadership tracks in the company for your underrepresented groups? This doesn't mean that you have to do like something that is unnatural. This is, hey, are we looking at our underrepresented groups and looking at our development programs that we have? And are we actually making sure that we're seeing a good number of representation in there? And if not, start asking the question, why? Why? Right? Go after that. Why is a beautiful question. One of the favorite things that we do in tech is ask the 5 whys. Get to the real root cause of the problem, not this superficial thing, right? It's never, oh, somebody forgot to put their name on the list. No, it goes even further than that. One of the things that we like to do also is put in front of, the executives kind of like, who are the members of your underrepresented group? Just to remind them, like, check in to see what's different. I've heard from so many people coming from companies that, have great names or whatever, but then all of a sudden when they're there, they feel so alone, and the attention given to their needs is non-existent. And people are going to run from your company if you do that. The truth is, you're not going to be competitive in the future unless you can attract an environment that's inclusive. We added at Capital One, we added the word belonging to, it was diversity and inclusion, and now we added belonging because, that's actually something that we found really is the secret ingredient between all the best working teams is, do you feel like you belong? And that's a litmus test you can always ask yourself. And if you don't, you need to have the people who are fearless to be able to say that they don't feel like they belong. So if you don't have people in your underrepresented groups being honest with you, that means you're not creating an environment where they can be honest. So if you're not hearing hard messages, you're only hearing hunky-dory things, you need to start to check yourself and ask yourself, have I actually created an environment here that just feeds me what I want to hear? You need people who can speak truth to power, but that can only exist if you create an environment where you don't get penalized for speaking truth to power. And so that's really some of the things that you can start to do from a leadership perspective. Ask yourself, like Janet said, how much are you actually investing in these programs? Next, are you building like development programs for folks, building career pathing for folks? Are you looking at your hiring and saying, hey, do I have like a way to make sure that the pool of candidates I'm getting is a diverse pool of candidates? And then finally, once you've done all that, really also look at, am I creating the ability for people to speak truth to power? Do I have the constructs for that? So those are just some thoughts that kind of come to me as to answer both the question and a follow-on to your excellent examples of how people in real situations can see this manifest. Janet.
Yeah, Mike, so much that you've said, just powerful messaging. I agree with you. I always say you cannot argue fact, and you find fact in data. Leverage the data. We have some great questions around, what metrics would you even think about when you're talking about ERGs and making that connection to DEI? And it's interesting. I always look at it this way. You have to first think about what it is you are trying to get after as an organization. What are the one or two areas that you truly want to focus on? The byproduct of that will naturally be some of the other areas that you could focus on. But for example, in your company, in my company, I'll use my company as an example. We are a tech organization, and in many tech organizations, and in the STEM industry overall, we know that men outnumber women. And so when we think about what are we trying to do, but however, women represent 51% of the global population. Women have buying power just as strong as men. The only two countries, interestingly enough, that men outnumber women are India and China. And those would then you kind of know, well, boys and men are favored over girl children, right, for cultural reasons. But for the rest of the world, women outnumber men. So when you start to think about the diversity of thinking, not just from a gender standpoint, decision-making tends to be so different. You might think, I want to get after getting either to some parity or at least increasing female representation in my organization. So then what do I have to do? You want to look at the data. You want to look at how has your past historical promotions, new hires, and changes, how has that looked? What's the velocity of which women are leaving over men in similar roles? You want to take all of that into account and then make a decision on, okay, if that's the case, if we have been kind of stagnant year over year, what's a realistic goal for us to get to, but also that's going to stretch us? Here's what happens when you do that. You then have to work with each leader. Each top leader has to get involved. So your CEO is going to lead the way by championing that message, that goal. We're now going to publish that externally, maybe through our ESG report, and make that commitment. So now our investors and our stakeholders and our board has an expectation for us to deliver. And then you're working with your executive leadership to say, here's our goal. What are your contributions going to be? Now, we want a global framework, but with local nuances, right? Because if we think about Europe and the role women play in the workplace in Europe, very different than in North America. So you look for where your opportunities are, but you also look at the fact that one size does not fit all. So that could potentially be a metric. When we think about BIPOC, our BIPOC population, our ERGs represent our BIPOC population in most cases, right? So when you're thinking about increasing levels across the organization, you got to be careful. You don't want to put numerical association because in some countries that's illegal because it could be deemed as a quota. However, you do want to think about where you're starting from and what is it that you're trying to accomplish as an organization. How do you make that connection to your ERGs? Well, then you start to look at, gosh, we have these senior level roles and we continuously go hire white men and women from outside the organization. Potentially, why don't you look within your ERGs? What development, what experiences might these men and women need to have in order to help them get through to that next level? What does that look like? And don't underestimate the power of sponsorship. We talk about allyship, but sponsorship is so important. As an executive or someone in C-suite, sponsoring folks, taking the time to look at metrics that you can fold in, like how many people from our women's ERG or from our Hispanic ERG has been promoted in the last year? What development have we given to our folks participating in our ERGs when they've identified that this is an area that is not represented for them right now? And then on the other side of training, when we're rolling out this mass training, what's the ROI? Are you talking about how you expect people to show up differently than maybe how they're doing today? I always say that, training doesn't change minds, but it needs to change behaviors. And so, Mike, when you think about kind of how you track progress in your organization, what are some of the metrics that you're looking at or measuring that helps you know that your the ERGs and the work you're doing in DEI is working for the positive?
Yeah, so there's some things that come out right out of the gate. Do we have promotion parity across each of the underrepresented groups? When we look at our, and then also we segment that when we think about okay, do we have that also by job role, right? I mean, that's important because there is more acute disproportions in certain job families. And so you got to be really mindful of that. For example, individual contributor, senior engineers, you see that across the industry. That's even less diverse in most companies than, just the regular software engineering pool. So, you may have even bastions of that need even more help, and I'll never forget one piece of advice that was given is when we helped Stacy Sanchez from Stanford. She said, when we help the most impacted, we lift all ships, right? So when you start there, you can start to get some benefit out of that. So pay attention to that. The other things that we look at, of course, is when it comes to hiring, an important thing to note is, did you have a diverse slate? Now, what I mean by that is, when I say slate, I mean the number of people you evaluated for a particular position, was it diverse? And if it wasn't, start to put in, there's nothing stopping you from going and making sure that you go back and ask the whys, figure out, are you not pulling from a sourcing mechanism that allows you to have a diverse slate? Because yes, it may take you a little longer, but at the end of the day, you're still going to hire the best person for the job, but you also have more opportunity to hire talent that you would otherwise have missed because of the systems that are in place that keep pushing the same candidates in your direction. So that is something you should absolutely also take a look at. I'll tell you, for Hispanics in Tech, the organization that I spend a lot of my time with the team running, we have three main areas that we really focus in on. The first area is around just kind of the hiring portion of it, supporting the hiring portion of it. We work with the AEs for the different universities we go out to. We also support historically Hispanic universities and do programs there. For example, we've set up a program partnering with our cyber organization that allows students to go through a really awesome summer program that on the other side they get certification, which is really exciting, and they get to work hand in hand. Now, whether or not they ever come to work for Capital One, that's not what matters. What matters is we're making a difference affecting the pipeline. Now, the second big area we focus on is helping the folks who are in the company rise. And then we do that with mentorship programs. We're very happy because we partner with High Tech, and it has an excellent leadership program that we get to nominate people into. So that is a lever that we can pull, that we don't have to create more resources inside to kind of support. We can rely on High Tech. And of course, we have other feeders within the organization we help people with. And of course, we have our annual conference as well as quarterly events that we pull together. We bring in thought-provoking speakers that really challenge us, everything from NASA astronauts to comedians. So it can run the gauntlet, because at the end of the day, remember, it's okay to do things that make people feel good. Don't think that your ERG has to be all science and tech and down. Listen, the first and most important thing that we do is help people feel like they belong, right? And so it's okay to have the feel good stuff. Don't be afraid to do it. But at the same time, always remember that there's so much more at stake and we have to keep pushing ourselves. But the third thing that we really measure and we focus on is our involvement in the community, the engagement we have with third-party organizations. When we formed as an organization, and it's a reflection of our community too. The folks were like, we want to make sure that we're giving back, right? Because it's in giving that, we can actually kind of grow and really multiply the effect of what we do.
Wow. Yeah. You are spot on. That's exactly, when I think about what we, how we deliver on our commitments, it could be deemed as pillars or, different streams. And it is around workplace, workforce, and marketplace. So very aligned to what you're saying. How can we partner with schools that authentically are looking to elevate and lift underrepresented talent? And what are we doing to help, nurture that? And when I talk about those partnerships, I always go back to the authenticity piece, because they don't want people coming in and just saying, "Oh, we want to throw money at you and sponsor you," because it's a real way of living. And so they want to hear and see that you are 100% invested. When we talk about kind of some of the other goals, whether it be, what we do from a social responsibility standpoint, how are we getting out there and volunteering? And I always say, as you grow in any organization, who are you bringing with you? What opportunities do you have to take a chance on someone that maybe might be overlooked time and time again because of how they look? When we talk about that diverse talent slate, I am not afraid to say that it's okay to put goals in place to say, the final candidate slate, at least one of those final candidates or more need to be a woman or a female or a visible minority candidate. And I will challenge when I start to go back and look at the data again to say, okay, that'll also inform on where are the areas of opportunity. So if we see specific leaders or hiring managers in the organization hiring in their own image, then we want to have a different conversation. Maybe it requires training. And that leads me to another word that I think tends to be ugly in our organizations, but it isn't. And it's about bias. We all have bias, by the way. I have a bias against snakes, and I assume they're all poisonous. I'm not going to hang around and say, "Oh, here, little snake, I wonder if you're going to, if you bite me, if I will die." I'm going to run for dear life and make that assumption. But I think, when bias starts to show up in a way that can hurt someone else's experience or create barriers for someone else, that's when we need to stop and take a look. Training isn't going to do it, folks. It's a way to raise awareness. What you need to do after that training and when you raise awareness is you have to take it to the next level and start to hold people accountable to behave in a different way. That means that the entire organization needs to be working together and get comfortable with talking about the uncomfortable. And I don't know about you, Mike, but sometimes I've been at organizations where I would say they have ostrich syndrome. And what that is you stick your head in the sand every time a difficult conversation rolls around, or avoid it like the plague. But I think in order for us to see real change, we have to get comfortable with talking about the uncomfortable. And then when we're making those measurements and those KPIs and we're looking at how we're going to know we're making progress and advancing our commitments, we should see the numbers changing. Our engagement surveys should start to tell us when we're slicing and dicing it that our underrepresented groups are having a different experience. You need to always go back and validate the truth through fact finding. And then lastly, 100% agree with you. Have fun, folks. We don't want this to be all about business, because we all, I think, naturally find moments of happiness in what we're doing, and being able to share that, I think, is so awesome. Take the opportunities to educate about your heritage, your culture, and what is near and special to you. And let's start to make that and normalize that in organizations, and make it okay to talk about those things as well, because that's a part of our identity.
Yeah, I would say bias training has been one of the most important things in my own advancement of kind of being able to lean into hard conversations and to check myself. Everybody, on the call, hopefully you've at least gone through something or read about, privilege and understanding privilege. Well, bias is something that, there's really, it's subconscious, right? You don't necessarily, it's not something that happens naturally. There are two books written by Daniel Kahneman. The first one was Thinking Fast and Slow. And that honestly kicked off a whole different world of conversation around bias. But the second one that this Nobel laureate wrote was called Noise. And he finished it was last summer with a couple other authors. He finished that book and it talks about noise. There are two parts to our decision-making and our judgment that really get impacted. One of them is bias. That's like if you were shooting at a target and you always shoot a little to the left. That's kind of like the bias. Whereas noise is a whole bunch of other factors. You were grouchy, hungry, headache, this or that. The wind was blowing a different way, and then it just scatters all over the target. You need to be able to control for those. The way you control for the first one, the bias, is by having some questions that ground you on whether or not you're susceptible to a particular bias in a situation. And then secondly, on the noise piece of it, the best way to counteract noise is by getting more judgments. Getting more opinions on a particular thing can actually reduce the amount of noise, or having some standards that you set. And that's why things like, did I have a diverse slate, is a way to reduce noise in your process. It also is a way that you can reduce bias if you also have a more structured interview process. And please, I hope everybody has a more structured interview process where you can defensively look at the way you interviewed each people, and it was the same, it had the same components, and you're judging people on the things that mattered for the job. Because that's something that also gets in the way of our underrepresented groups oftentimes, is because people become blinded by the way they answer the questions, which is different, or the way they may approach to thinking about something may be different. But was their answers good? Did it answer the question? Did it have the influence? Did it have the, SME knowledge that they need? That's what matters. So make sure you're looking at those processes carefully, and you're debiasing them, and you're also looking at how you can reduce noise. So, I think there's a lot of things you can do now to start helping yourself, if not others in your organization.
Mike, yeah, and building on what you're saying, talk to your ERGs, talk to the members. They have rich and valuable insights that they can share to help inform. And that's kind of what I want. My closing comment is just around, taking us right back to kind of full circle. ERGs are more than food fund and festivities. You have an opportunity to really use your ERGs as a strategic business partner in your organization and help you solve real problems that exist, especially when you're trying to grow organically or inorganically. And so you take that opportunity to leverage the diverse thinking, the innovation, the creativity that you have available to you through your resource groups, and ask them then to also submit business strategy. What are you going to accomplish for the year? And get that from at the start of the year, because you can align that to your organization's strategic priorities and make that connection. So then you're shedding the I think the reputation that ERGs are just fun or social groups. Mike, any parting words of wisdom that you want to share?
Well, I want to share with everybody a voice of a Hispanic woman who lived in the 1600s, Sor Juana de la Cruz. And her advice is what I will leave you with. She said she was a woman who did something she shouldn't have. She had an education. She learned. She conversed with Isaac Newton. All these things were not allowed for women at the time. And she said, I do not learn to know more, but to ignore less. So on each of your journeys, good luck. I hope you can ignore less and see things more authentically. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Have a wonderful day.